His finger jabbed inches from my face as he yelled, "You're trespassing, Jessica." The tow truck roared behind him, neighbors filming, and my hands trembled. Not with fear, but rage. When he called to tow my own car from my own driveway, something inside me finally broke. The sun was brutal that afternoon, glaring down on the asphalt until it shimmered like glass. The air smelled of gasoline and hot tar, the kind of heat that makes tempers flare faster. My driveway, the one my late husband and I poured every savings into, was now surrounded by strangers. The tow truck driver avoided my eyes as he uncoiled the metal hook, and Robert Carver, the HOA president, stood proudly at the edge of my lawn like a man enforcing divine justice. "Robert, you can't do this!" I shouted, stepping forward. My voice cracked but carried. "That car is on my property." He didn't flinch. He was a tall man with a square jaw and perfectly parted silver hair, the kind of man who smiled only when he knew he had you cornered. He held up a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. "This driveway, Jessica, belongs to the association now. You were notified last month." I blinked, trying to process what I was hearing. "Belongs to who?" "The HOA," he said calmly, his tone almost rehearsed. "You failed to maintain it according to standards, so the board voted to reclaim it as common property. We've already sold it." For a moment, the words didn't register. Sold. The word felt like ice water down my spine. My car, my garage, my front door. All part of the home my husband and I bought a decade ago. The home we built together. The idea that some clipboard-wielding tyrant could just sell it off without my consent made my stomach twist. "This is theft," I snapped, stepping between him and the tow truck. "You can't sell what you don't own, Robert." He smirked, tilting his head slightly. "Then call your lawyer, Jessica. But right now, you're trespassing on HOA property." Behind me, the truck's hydraulic lift hissed. The sound made me flinch. My heart was hammering so hard it drowned out everything else. The murmurs of neighbors, the clicking of phone cameras, even the chirping cicadas in the trees. I looked around, searching for one friendly face in the crowd. People I'd known for years, the couple from next door, the retired teacher from across the street, all standing there, recording, whispering. No one stepped forward. No one said a word. The tow driver crouched by my car, metal clinking as he fastened the hook around my front axle. The sound was final, mechanical, cruel. I took another step forward, and Robert raised his hand, palm out, like a cop directing traffic. "Don't make this worse, Jessica," he said. "It's already done." My hand shook, but not from fear anymore. It was fury. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared him down. "You think you can humiliate me like this? You think this neighborhood belongs to you?" He leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne. Expensive, sharp. "No," he said softly. "It belongs to those who follow the rules." Something in me snapped. I wanted to scream, to rip that clipboard from his hand, to make him understand that this wasn't about rules. It was about control. It was about men like him thinking they could dictate how we lived, what we owned, what we deserved. I turned back toward the tow driver, my voice breaking. "Don't you dare touch that car. This is private property." The man hesitated, glancing nervously at Robert. For a second, I thought maybe he'd back off. But Robert gave him a single nod. Small, cold, commanding. The truck engine roared. The metal hook tightened with a sharp clank that echoed through the cul-de-sac. The crowd gasped as the front end of my car lifted off the ground, tires squealing slightly against the pavement. It felt like watching a piece of my life being torn away in slow motion. My throat burned, my vision blurred, but I didn't move. I couldn't, because I knew that if I backed down now they'd take more than my driveway next. Robert turned to leave, satisfied. "You brought this on yourself," he said over his shoulder. I didn't reply. I just watched the tow truck pull away, my car's reflection shrinking in the side mirror, my hands curling into fists. My whole body trembled, but my voice came out low, steady, certain. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Robert." And as the rumble of the truck faded down the street, I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. When the tow truck's hook clamped onto my bumper, I realized they'd just declared war. After the tow truck disappeared and the crowd drifted away, I stood alone on the edge of my torn-up driveway, my reflection still burned into that car window as if it had been carved there forever. The silence afterward was heavier than the shouting had been. But before all this chaos, before Robert Carver and his power-hungry board turned my home into a battlefield, this place had been my heaven, my safe little corner of the world. I can still remember the first morning we moved in. The house was smaller than we'd dreamed of, but it had sunlight that poured through the kitchen window like gold. My husband, Daniel, had built me a raised garden bed in the backyard. "This soil's going to be good to us," he'd said, pressing his hand into the earth. Back then, every Saturday smelled like fresh coffee and cut grass. I'd bake blueberry muffins while the kids ran through the sprinkler, their laughter spilling down the driveway. Life was simple, warm, full of noise and love, the kind you don't realize you'll miss until it's gone. Daniel passed away 3 years later. It wasn't sudden, but it still felt like being hit by a wave I never saw coming. The house became quiet, too quiet. I kept his garden alive the way he kept me strong, patient, steady, hopeful. I told myself I'd never leave that house, no matter what it cost, because it wasn't just property. It was memory. It was us. When the HOA sent a letter inviting me to their quarterly meeting, I figured it was harmless. I'd always paid my dues on time. The letter was signed by Robert Carver, HOA president, a name I hadn't heard before. At the meeting, he stood at the front of the room, tall, confident, with that easy politician's smile that made everyone want to agree with him. He shook my hand firmly, looked me right in the eye, and said, "We're just trying to make this neighborhood shine, Jessica." At first, I believed him. He spoke about unity, order, community pride. He even complimented my garden, calling it a little patch of paradise. It sounded genuine, and I wanted to believe in good neighbors again. I volunteered for the holiday decorating committee that same night. For a while, things actually felt better. People waved more, lawns looked neater, and we even had a small block party where Robert played the charming host, grilling burgers and talking about improving property value. But good things don't last long when control's the goal. The first complaint came 2 months later. A notice about my mailbox. "Too rustic," it said. "Non-compliant with HOA standards." I laughed it off at first, thinking it was some clerical mistake. Then came another. My garden fence was 2 inches taller than permitted. Then one about the cracks in my driveway. The tone of each letter got colder, more official, more intimidating. Robert still smiled at me at meetings, but now it felt rehearsed. His compliments turned to subtle warnings. "You know, Jessica," he'd say, "little violations can add up. Wouldn't want fines to start stacking, right?" He'd say it lightly, almost friendly, but his eyes didn't match his tone. They were sharp, calculating, the kind of eyes that looked through you instead of at you. I started noticing things I hadn't before, like how his car always slowed down when he drove past my house, or how the same neighbor who used to bring over cookies suddenly avoided eye contact. The neighborhood that once felt like a family was shifting, becoming cold, watchful. I tried not to take it personally. Maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, what could possibly go wrong in a quiet, suburban community with trimmed hedges and smiling neighbors? But something in my gut told me that the man who talked about rules and beauty was really talking about power and control. Then came the letter. Plain white envelope, no return address, just my name printed neatly across the front. It was sitting in my mailbox when I came home from the grocery store one afternoon, fluttering slightly in the breeze. It didn't look like much, just another piece of paper, but I remember how my stomach sank the moment I saw it. Something about it felt final, like a line being drawn in the sand that I hadn't even realized existed. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it while the kettle boiled. The garden was quiet outside. The sun was setting, painting everything gold, peaceful. The kind of peace that always comes right before the storm. That single letter in my mailbox looked harmless. Until I opened it. The letter that looked so harmless changed everything. Inside was a notice of violation, printed on crisp white paper, the kind that feels official just to touch. The heading alone made my stomach twist. Unauthorized driveway modifications. Immediate action required. According to Robert Carver and his board, my driveway was no longer considered private property. It had, as the letter so confidently declared, been reclassified as part of the neighborhood's shared easement. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. My name was on that deed. I'd signed those closing papers with Daniel a decade ago, and I remembered his proud smile as he slid the folder across the table to the realtor. He'd traced the lot lines on the map with his finger, saying, "This is ours, Jess. Every inch of it." Those words echoed in my head as I read the letter again and again, trying to find logic where there was none. The next morning, I called the HOA office. A woman named Cheryl answered, her tone distant, clipped, almost rehearsed. "All inquiries regarding property boundaries must be submitted in writing," she said before I'd even finished explaining. I asked if I could speak to Robert directly. She sighed audibly and told me he was in meetings all week. It was the first time I realized the HOA wasn't a group of neighbors trying to help. It was a machine built to keep people like me in line. Within days, another envelope appeared. This time a fine. $250 for unauthorized maintenance. I hadn't touched a thing. My driveway looked exactly as it had for 10 years, save for a few harmless cracks that came from time and weather. I started flipping through my old paperwork, searching for anything that proved the land was mine. My dining table turned into an evidence pile: closing statements, tax receipts, surveys, old emails with our realtor. That night, surrounded by papers and coffee cups, I found it. The property plat from our closing. It clearly outlined the driveway as part of my lot. My name, my boundaries, my property. Relief washed over me for a brief second before turning into anger. How could they claim something so obviously false? I took photos, scanned documents, and marched into the next HOA meeting determined to set the record straight. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room filled with folding chairs and the faint smell of stale coffee. Robert stood at the front, leaning casually against the podium, greeting people as they walked in. His charm was turned on full blast, until he saw me. His smile froze, then reappeared just enough to look polite. When it was my turn to speak, I held up the plat map and said, "This document shows the driveway is part of my private lot. Whatever you've recorded is wrong." Robert glanced at the paper but didn't even reach for it. "Ms. Reed," he said smoothly, "those documents are outdated. The association has updated boundaries to reflect community maintenance agreements." I blinked. Updated by who? You can't change property lines without consent. You know that. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered, but Robert didn't falter. He raised his voice slightly, making sure the entire room could hear. "Maybe you just don't understand how shared easements work. We maintain the neighborhood collectively, Jessica. That's what you signed up for when you bought here." A few people chuckled quietly. My cheeks burned. He was twisting the truth and he knew it. I opened my mouth to respond, but he cut me off with a smirk. "We'll review your evidence, but I'd suggest focusing on compliance rather than confrontation." The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. My throat tightened as embarrassment sank in. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, like I was a child being scolded. I gathered my papers with shaking hands and left before the meeting ended, my heels clicking against the tile like gunshots in the quiet. Back home, I sat on my porch under the dim glow of the porch light, the cool night air pressing against my skin. My driveway, my own driveway, stretched before me, quiet, innocent, and suddenly foreign. How could they claim it wasn't mine? That's when I remembered something Daniel used to say. Never trust a map you didn't get from the county. He was right. Always cross-check HOA maps with your county's official plat. They're often not the same. I decided right then that I'd go to the county office in the morning. I wasn't going to let them gaslight me into giving up what we built. But before I could even act, the HOA made their next move. The following afternoon, I pulled into my driveway and froze. There, taped right in the center of the concrete in big bold red letters, was a sticker that read "Sold." My knees nearly gave out. The next morning, I drove downtown with my stomach in knots and a stack of HOA letters on the passenger seat. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel the entire drive. The county recorder's office wasn't far, but it felt like another world. Quiet, bureaucratic, safe. I told myself that if I could just find the right document, all of this madness would end. They couldn't argue with proof. The office smelled faintly of paper and toner, and the hum of fluorescent lights filled the air. Behind a counter cluttered with forms stood a man in his mid-30s, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, the kind of person who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but still cared enough to help. His nameplate read Mark Daniels. He looked up as I approached. "Morning. How can I help you?" I laid the papers on the counter. "I need to verify property ownership on my lot. My HOA is claiming they have partial control of my driveway. They're saying it's shared property." He frowned slightly, flipping through the stack. "What's your address?" I gave it to him, and he began typing. The clacking of keys echoed through the quiet room. He paused, squinting at the screen, then turned the monitor slightly toward me. "Here's your parcel record. The driveway is absolutely part of your lot. It's right there, deeded directly to you." My heart skipped. "You're sure?" He nodded, printing a copy. "The plat map confirms it. It hasn't changed since development. The HOA can't reclassify it without a formal transfer and your signature." The printer whirred, spitting out the pages like truth finally finding its voice. He handed me the documents and I stared at the bold black lines marking my property boundaries. It was all there. Official, notarized, indisputable. "So if they're claiming otherwise, what does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark hesitated. "It means they're wrong at best, or doing something illegal at worst." My stomach sank. "Illegal how?" He tapped a paragraph at the bottom of the document. "If the HOA sold any portion of this property without your consent, that's a fraudulent conveyance. They can't sell, lease, or reassign private property, even by a majority vote." His tone was calm, but the weight of those words hit like thunder. An HOA cannot sell, lease, or reassign private property, even by majority vote. The realization came like a physical blow. I felt my face flush as anger bubbled beneath my ribs. They'd stood there, Robert, his board, their smug smiles, pretending it was all legal, all part of the process, while secretly selling what wasn't theirs. I leaned closer. "Is there any record of a transaction involving my address?" Mark clicked through files, brows furrowing. "Actually, yes. Looks like a lien satisfaction from 3 months ago, issued by the HOA to a paving contractor. It references your lot number." My mouth went dry. "They sold my driveway to pay off their debt?" He looked at me grimly. "That's what it looks like." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. The sound of the printer, the shuffle of papers, the low murmur of other voices. It all faded. All I could see was Robert's smirk that day on the street, the satisfaction in his eyes when he called the tow truck. He'd known exactly what he was doing. Mark must have seen the change in my expression because his tone softened. "Look, you've got a strong case here. Keep those documents safe. If you want to file a complaint, start with the county attorney's office. They handle property disputes and HOA fraud." I nodded numbly, clutching the papers like a lifeline. "Thank you, Mark. Really?" He gave a sympathetic half smile. "You'd be surprised how often this happens. Some associations think they're above the law. They forget homeowners have more power than they think." That line stuck with me all the way home. Homeowners have more power than they think. That night, my dining table was buried again. Not in confusion this time, but in evidence. Copies, highlighters, sticky notes marking every date, signature, and boundary line. My living room glowed with the soft yellow light of the lamp, the air heavy with the smell of ink and stale coffee. I sat cross-legged on the floor, marking every section where the HOA's claim contradicted the county records. By midnight, tears blurred the words on the page. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was exhausted. By the lies, by the gaslighting, by the sheer arrogance of men who thought they could take what they wanted because they wore name tags that said board member. I ran my fingers across the stamped seal on the plat map, the proof of what I already knew in my gut. They hadn't made a mistake. They'd made a move, and this time, I had the law to make mine. They'd stolen my land, and the law was on my side. Legal nugget. You can enforce trespassing laws on privately deeded easements, even against HOA members. Boundaries exist for a reason, and the law will always recognize them. After uncovering the truth at the county office, I thought the worst was behind me. I had proof. I had the law, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without tears burning my eyes. But by sunrise, it was clear I had underestimated just how far Robert Carver and his board would go to protect their lie. What came next wasn't about rules or regulations. It was punishment. It started small, like most bullying does. A bright orange parking violation appeared on my windshield one morning. Unauthorized vehicle placement, it read. I stood there in disbelief, staring at the ticket fluttering in the breeze. My car parked neatly in the same driveway they claimed to own. I tore it off and tossed it on the porch, thinking it was just another intimidation tactic. But the next day, there were 2 more. By the end of the week, I had 6. Then came the letters, one after another, stuffed into my mailbox, each colder than the last. Late fee, $175. Non-compliance with landscaping standards. Pending lien for unpaid assessments. Every line written in that stiff legal tone meant to sound factual, but the message underneath was always the same. We control you. When I tried to talk to neighbors about it, they wouldn't meet my eyes. The same people who used to wave from their porches now turned away when I walked by. Even the kids who used to play with mine crossed the street instead of cutting through our yard. I heard whispers behind closed doors. She's causing trouble. She's fighting the HOA. I wasn't just being fined. I was being isolated. One afternoon, as I was pulling weeds from Daniel's garden, I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. I turned around to see Robert's black SUV idling at the curb. The window rolled down slowly, and there he was, wearing that smug expression that made my skin crawl. He leaned out just enough to be heard. "You could make this easier on yourself, Jessica," he said casually. "There's no need to drag this out. Mistakes happen. Maybe it's time to let the board handle it." My hands froze in the dirt. "You mean let you steal my property in peace?" He smiled faintly. "I mean you're creating a lot of unnecessary tension. It's not good for the neighborhood. People talk." The SUV pulled away before I could reply, leaving a trail of exhaust and dread behind. My hands were shaking again, and for the first time, I realized this wasn't just intimidation. It was harassment. Deliberate, organized, personal. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made my heart race. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying his words, his tone, the way he said people talk. When I finally drifted off near dawn, I woke an hour later to a loud bang. The sound of metal. I rushed outside barefoot and found my mailbox bent sideways, the door hanging loose. The letters inside were shredded, scattered across the lawn. I stood there trembling in my robe, the early morning air biting against my skin. It wasn't random vandalism. The timing was too perfect. Someone wanted me scared, and it was working. For days afterward, I felt like I was being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I saw Robert's car pass slowly down the street. Sometimes he'd stop, roll his window down halfway, and just sit there, pretending to be on his phone. Other times, I'd see HOA board members walking by, pausing in front of my house to take pictures. For documentation, they'd say when I confronted them. I started getting chest pains at night, my hands trembling so badly I couldn't hold a cup of tea without spilling it. Sleep became impossible. I'd wake up gasping, convinced I'd heard footsteps outside. The stress crawled under my skin like something alive, something feeding off fear. That's when I found an article online about HOA abuse cases. It said that harassment or selective enforcement by an HOA can violate fair housing laws. The words leapt off the screen. What they were doing wasn't just cruel, it was illegal. But knowing the law didn't stop the fear. Laws don't stand guard outside your door at night. By the third week, I'd stopped checking my mail altogether. Every envelope felt like a threat, every paper a weapon. The neighborhood that once felt like home now pulsed with quiet hostility. Even the sound of lawnmowers and sprinklers felt different. Mechanical, menacing. I thought I had seen the worst of it, but I was wrong. One night, as I returned from picking up my kids from their friend's house, the porch light flickered against a white paper taped to my front door. I froze halfway up the steps, heart pounding. For a second, I thought it was another notice from the HOA. Another warning, another fine. But as I got closer, I realized the header was missing. No HOA logo. No seal. Just a single sheet of paper, taped crookedly, fluttering in the breeze. That night, I found a notice taped to my door. And this time, it wasn't from the HOA. Legal nugget. Always cross-check your HOA maps with your county's official plat. They're often not the same. The truth isn't in the paperwork they give you. It's in the documents they hope you never read. The notice on my door was the moment I finally felt something inside me crack. It wasn't from the HOA this time. It was anonymous, printed in black ink on plain paper. Stop fighting the board or you'll regret it. No signature. No return address. Just that one sentence, taped to my front door like a threat. I remember standing there in the porch light, the rain beginning to fall, the paper turning soft and limp in my hands. For a long time, I didn't move. My heart thudded so loud it drowned out the sound of the rain hitting the gutter. It was one thing to be fined, ticketed, or mocked. But this was personal. It was fear, wrapped in paper and glue, shoved straight into my life. That night I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. I tucked my kids into bed and tried to pretend everything was fine, but my daughter looked up at me with those big worried eyes and asked, "Mom, are we going to lose our house?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I wanted to promise her no. To swear that I'd protect everything her father built, but the truth was I didn't know anymore. I just kissed her forehead and whispered, "Go to sleep, sweetheart. I've got it handled." But I didn't have it handled. After they fell asleep, I grabbed my folder, the same one filled with deeds, letters, and copies from the county office, and went out to the car. The rain had picked up, pounding on the roof like drum beats. I turned on the defroster, watching the glass fog and clear again in waves, the wipers squealing across the windshield. The papers lay on my lap, damp at the edges from my shaking hands. I pressed them against my chest and broke down completely. The smell of wet concrete and gasoline filled the air, mixing with the salt of my tears. I felt trapped, boxed in by walls I couldn't see but could feel pressing tighter every day. I'd done everything right. Paid my dues, followed the rules, tried to reason. And still, they had the power to humiliate me, isolate me, strip me of my peace. A crack of thunder rolled across the sky, deep and angry. I stared out through the rain-streaked glass and whispered, "Why, Daniel? Why is this happening?" And then, like it was coming from somewhere inside me, or maybe from the memory of him, I heard his voice, calm, steady, that same reassuring tone he used when the kids were scared of storms. "Never let them take what's yours, Jess. Not ever." For a second I could almost see him, sitting beside me in the passenger seat, hands folded, watching the rain too. That memory hit harder than anything the HOA had done. He'd built that driveway with his own 2 hands. Every nail, every inch of concrete. It had been part of our dream. And now, some man with a clipboard thought he could erase it with a vote and a signature. I wiped my eyes and looked down at the papers in my lap. The official county map. The notarized plat. Proof of ownership. They weren't just documents anymore. They were ammunition. Something shifted inside me. That slow, heavy weight of grief and fear turning into something sharper, harder. The same fire that had carried me through losing Daniel was still there, buried under exhaustion and heartbreak. Now, it was clawing its way back. I took a deep breath, opened the glove box, and pulled out a pen. On the back of one of the HOA letters, I started writing. Names, dates, violations, lies. Every time they fined me, every time they harassed me, every name of a witness. I wrote until my fingers cramped, until the ink smudged with tears and rainwater. The next morning, I woke up feeling like someone new, or maybe like the version of me that used to fight for things. I called the county office again, then a legal aid line. I started printing copies of every document, storing them in sealed folders. No more begging, no more hoping for decency. If they wanted to play this like a war, then I'd stop playing by their rules. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my husband's memory, my kids' security, my dignity. All the things they couldn't file away or sell off. I walked outside and looked at that strip of concrete that had started it all. The rain had stopped, but the driveway glistened like glass, reflecting the gray morning sky. I ran my hand over the cold surface and whispered to myself, "Not 1 inch. They don't get 1 inch." Then I went back inside and started planning. The fear was still there, but now it had company. Resolve. If they wanted a war over property lines, they were about to meet the real owner. The morning after that storm, I wasn't the same woman who'd stood crying in her car. I woke up with a kind of clarity that fear can't survive in. The HOA had taken enough, my peace, my sleep, my reputation. But what they hadn't taken was the truth. And that I was about to turn into a weapon. I spent the morning gathering every document I had, deeds, plat maps, county printouts, violation letters, and drove straight to a law firm downtown that handled property disputes. The office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. The receptionist's voice was polite but tired as she said, "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, setting the folder on the counter. "But I have a case." That's how I met Ethan Brooks, a young real estate attorney with the kind of energy you only see in people who still believe the law means something. His office was small but organized, filled with books about land use and zoning law. He flipped through my folder, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. Finally, he looked up. "Jessica, I'll be honest. This is one of the worst HOA overreach cases I've seen. They can't sell your driveway. They can't even reclassify it without your consent. I have all the county documents," I said, sliding the plat map toward him. "Everything they're claiming contradicts this." He nodded, scanning it closely. "Right. And here's the kicker. Not only is the driveway yours, but the sidewalk and the curb in front of it fall under your deeded property line. It's a private easement. The HOA doesn't have authority there." I blinked, trying to process it. "You mean, even the sidewalk?" "That's right," Ethan said, leaning back. "They've been using your property to enforce rules they don't have the right to enforce. That means any HOA car parked there is technically trespassing." The words sent a jolt through me, not just relief, but power. For weeks I'd been cornered, humiliated, made to feel like I was crazy for defending what was mine. Now, for the first time, the law was on my side. He pulled a notepad closer and began jotting down notes. "You're going to document everything. Photos, videos, timestamps. If an HOA vehicle parks or stops on your property, record it. Then we'll file a cease and desist and notify the county of their boundary violation." "What about the harassment?" I asked quietly. "The fines, the threats?" "That's the second part," he said, his tone sharpening. "If they've selectively enforced rules against you or retaliated after you challenged them, that could fall under fair housing violation. They think you're powerless, and that's their mistake." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not a big smile, but a small one. The kind that comes when you finally realize you're done being afraid. When I got home, I printed large color copies of the plat map and pinned them to my kitchen wall, like a battle plan. I bought 2 metal signs online that afternoon. Private property. No parking. Trespassers will be prosecuted. When the package arrived 3 days later, I installed them myself, one at the edge of the curb, one near the driveway. The ground was hard, the hammer heavy, but with every strike, I felt more like myself again. The neighbors peeked through curtains as I worked. A few whispered to each other, and one even took a photo, probably to send to Robert. Let them. I was done hiding. That evening, I walked the property line with my camera phone, recording everything. Every inch of pavement, every crack, every marker that proved where my land began and theirs ended. The setting sun reflected off the fresh metal of the signs, and for once the sight of my own driveway didn't fill me with dread. It filled me with quiet defiance. Later that night, as I reviewed my footage, I realized something important Ethan had told me. You can enforce trespassing laws on privately deeded easements, even against HOA members. The sentence replayed in my mind like a mantra. The HOA had used rules and fear as their weapons. Now I had the law. Clean, clear, written in ink and backed by the state. I slept for the first time in weeks, my nerves steady, my resolve like steel. But the universe has a way of testing your peace. When I stepped outside the next morning, coffee in hand, I froze. A silver sedan sat parked halfway on the curb, its tires pressed against my new sign, the HOA's emblem stickered proudly on the windshield. Robert Carver's car. By morning, the first HOA car was illegally parked on my sidewalk. When I saw Robert's silver sedan sitting half on the curb, half on my property, I didn't shout, I didn't call, and I didn't panic. I just stood there, coffee in hand, staring at that shiny HOA emblem, glinting in the sunlight like a dare. The same man who'd called me a trespasser was now parked squarely on my land. It was poetic, the kind of irony that makes you laugh once you've cried enough. I set my mug down, walked back inside, and opened my folder of evidence. Every map, every document, every county verification sat there waiting like pieces on a chessboard. Ethan Brooks' words echoed in my head. You can enforce trespassing laws on privately deeded easements, even against HOA members. So I did exactly that. I printed a simple form titled Private Property Violation Notice, official looking, clear, and backed by the law. Each citation listed the date, the time, and a note at the bottom. This property is privately owned and recorded under Lot 32, Parcel Marlau 417, as verified by the County Recorder's Office. Continued violations will be reported to law enforcement. I signed it Jessica Reed, property owner, and taped it neatly to Robert's windshield. Then, for good measure, I took out my phone and recorded the whole thing. A slow pan from the no parking sign to the HOA emblem to the car's tires resting on my curb. I narrated calmly, like a reporter. This vehicle is illegally parked on private property. The owner has been previously notified. The next day, there were 2 more cars, both belonging to board members. Same spot, same violation. So I issued 2 more citations, recorded both incidents, and sent copies of the video and legal documentation to Ethan. He replied almost immediately, "Perfect. Keep recording. Every ticket builds your case." Word spread fast. Within a week, neighbors started noticing. I'd catch them glancing through curtains or whispering as they walked past. A few even giving me small nods of approval. Some of them had been fined unfairly too. Grass an inch too high, shutters the wrong color, flower beds not uniform. The HOA had ruled over them for years, and now they were finally seeing someone push back. One evening, as I was hammering in a second private property sign near the driveway, my next-door neighbor Carol walked over carrying her garbage can. She hesitated, then said quietly, "Good for you, Jessica." Her voice cracked slightly, like she hadn't spoken up in a long time. "We've all been scared to cross him." I smiled faintly. "Not anymore." That's when I noticed the SUV again. Robert's creeping slowly past my house. He stopped for just a second, long enough for our eyes to meet. His smirk was gone. He drove off without a word. By the 3rd week, the HOA's confidence started to crumble. They called an emergency community compliance meeting. a desperate attempt to reassert control. I went, not to argue this time, but to watch. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with fear and frustration. Robert stood at the front, his composure slipping as he shuffled through papers. We've had incidents of non-compliance regarding parking enforcement, he began, glancing my way. Certain homeowners are misunderstanding the spirit of community rules. I raised my hand. You mean the homeowner whose property you tried to sell illegally? Murmurs rippled through the room. He ignored me, but his hands trembled slightly. Let's stay civil, Mrs. Reed. Civil? I said evenly. You towed my car off my own driveway, Robert. I'm just enforcing the same laws you pretended to follow. The silence that followed was electric. For the first time, I wasn't the one shrinking in embarrassment. He was. That night, as if fate wanted to stamp the moment with irony, a black and white sheriff's cruiser rolled into the neighborhood. 2 deputies stepped out and knocked on my door. My heart skipped, but they were polite, professional. Mrs. Reed, one said, we received documentation regarding trespassing violations on your property. You've done everything by the book. We just need to verify boundaries. I handed them the county plats, marked in red ink. They studied the papers carefully. One of them smiled. Looks like you're absolutely right. They've been trespassing on your easement. You can press charges if it continues. A laugh broke out of me before I could stop it. Half disbelief, half relief. After weeks of fear and humiliation, hearing an officer confirm what I'd been saying all along felt like oxygen after drowning. Tears mixed with laughter until I had to wipe my face with my sleeve. The deputy nodded. You did the right thing documenting everything. Not many people stand up to HOAs, but you've built a solid case here. Thank you, I said softly. I just want them to stop. He gave a small grin. Something tells me they're about to. The next morning, the whole neighborhood buzzed with gossip. The sheriff had gone straight to the HOA office, citation in hand. I didn't need to be there to imagine it. Robert's perfect composure cracking as an officer handed him an official warning, his pride deflating with every word. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled without fear. But when the sheriff served Robert with a citation, his smile finally cracked. Legal nugget harassment or selective enforcement by an HOA can violate fair housing laws. You have the right to peace in your own home. No board or neighbor can take that away. Robert Carver had always loved an audience. Every HOA meeting he ran was a performance. Him at the center, smiling that politician's smile, surrounded by nodding heads, too afraid to disagree. But this time, the crowd wasn't nodding. This time, they were angry. The special session on compliance and community conduct had been announced only 2 days earlier, an obvious attempt to regain control. The community center was packed, folding chairs scraping against tile, the murmur of voices thick with tension. I sat near the back with my phone already recording, the small red light glowing like a secret weapon. After weeks of silence, people had finally started talking, and word of the sheriff's visit had spread like wildfire. Robert stood at the podium, tie perfectly knotted, papers stacked in front of him. There's been a lot of misinformation circulating, he began, his voice calm but strained. Certain individuals have misrepresented the board's actions and caused unnecessary division. A man in the front row shot up his hand. Is it misinformation that you've been using HOA funds to pay personal debts? Robert's face twitched. Sir, that's not accurate. What about the sold driveway? Another woman interrupted. We all saw the sheriff's car at your office. You told us the HOA owned that land, but the county records say otherwise. The room erupted. People shouted over each other, demanding refunds, resignations, explanations. The sound was chaotic, raw, the perfect soundtrack to a dictator losing his throne. Robert slammed his hand against the podium. Enough, he barked. The microphone squealed with feedback. This meeting is not about gossip. Mrs. Reed has been spreading lies, manipulating documents, and creating hysteria. Every eye turned toward me. I stood slowly, holding my phone in plain sight. The only documents I've shown are from the county office. The same ones your board chose to ignore. He pointed at me, his voice shaking with fury. You don't understand how these things work. The HOA had the right to reclassify shared property to settle outstanding obligations. I took a step forward. You mean debts? You sold property you didn't own to pay HOA debts. That's fraud. Gasps rippled through the room. I could see his control slipping, the way his jaw tightened, his eyes darting toward the board members sitting beside him. They looked pale, nervous, ready to bolt. Watch your words, Jessica, he hissed into the microphone. You're walking a fine line. Then clarify, I said evenly. Did you sell my driveway, yes or no? The room fell silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the faint buzzing of a fluorescent light. Robert's lips parted, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. I approved the sale as part of a financial resolution, he snapped. We were acting in the best interest of the community. There it was. His confession, loud enough for every camera and recording phone in the room to catch. The sound of it hit like thunder. My pulse quickened. I steadied my phone, zooming in on his face, every vein on his temple visible as he realized what he'd just said. Thank you, I said softly. That's all I needed. The crowd exploded again. Shouting, accusations, demands for his resignation. 2 board members stood up and left mid-meeting, one of them muttering, I'm not going down for this. Papers flew from the table as Robert tried to shout over the noise, but his voice was drowned in the chaos he'd created. By the time I walked out, my hands were trembling. Not from fear, but adrenaline. The truth wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a roar. That night, I sent the video to a local reporter named Lydia Cruz, a name I remembered from a segment on homeowners' rights. Within hours she called me back. Jessica, this footage is explosive. Can you confirm it's authentic? Every second, I said. I have the county documents to prove it. She exhaled sharply. Good. Because if this airs, it's going to blow your HOA apart. The next evening, Lydia's story hit the local news. Homeowner exposes HOA fraud. President accused of selling private property. My phone buzzed non-stop. Calls, texts, messages from neighbors and even strangers thanking me for standing up. The once silent community now buzzed with a single question. How much had Robert really stolen? Watching the report, I felt something I hadn't in months. Pride. My name wasn't just the target of rumors anymore. It was tied to the truth. Lydia's closing words were perfect. This case highlights the power of public records. Never underestimate them. They can bring down anyone. And as those words played through the TV, my phone rang again, this time from an unknown number. A calm voice on the other end said, Mrs. Reed, this is the sheriff's office. We need to discuss the video you released. My heart skipped. And just like that, I whispered, the sheriff's department launched an investigation. The morning of the hearing felt like stepping into another kind of battlefield. Colder, quieter, but every bit as dangerous. The county courthouse loomed ahead, gray stone glistening in the pale light. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of old wood and paper. People spoke in hushed tones, their voices blending into a low murmur that echoed off the walls. I clutched my folder of evidence like armor and tried to steady my breathing. Ethan Brooks met me outside the courtroom, calm as ever, suit perfectly pressed. You ready? He asked, his voice low but confident. As ready as I'll ever be, I whispered. My hands were cold, but my resolve burned steady. For months, Robert Carver and his board had bullied, lied, and manipulated. Now they'd finally be forced to answer for it. Under oath. The courtroom filled quickly. Neighbors came out of curiosity, some out of guilt. Even Lydia Cruz sat in the back with her notebook open, ready to record history. When Robert walked in, he didn't look like the smug man I'd faced for months. His suit was too crisp, his tie too tight, and for the first time, his smile didn't reach his eyes. The bailiff called the room to order. All rise. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair pulled back into a bun, took her seat. Her tone was brisk, no nonsense. We're here today to address allegations of property fraud and misuse of authority by the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association. Robert's attorney stood first, trying to set the tone. Your Honor, this case is a misunderstanding. The HOA acted in good faith to resolve community debts through standard easement reclassification procedures. The judge raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting a homeowners association can sell privately deeded property without the owner's consent? The lawyer hesitated. Only under exceptional circumstances, Your Honor. Show me where that's legal, she said flatly. He fumbled with his papers. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stood. Your Honor, if I may. He stepped forward, placing the county plat map on the judge's desk. This document shows the property line of Mrs. Reed's home. It's recorded, notarized, and unchanged since its original filing. The HOA attempted to sell a section of this property to a third party without her consent. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud. I watched the judge's expression harden as she scanned the documents. She turned to Robert. Mr. Carver, you were president at the time of this sale, correct? Robert cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor, but the board believed. Answer the question directly, she interrupted. Did you authorize the sale? He hesitated. It was a collective decision by the board. Did you sign the transfer paperwork? He shifted uncomfortably. I did. Ethan's voice was calm, precise. So you knowingly signed a property transfer on land that, as per county record, did not belong to your association. Robert's lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved him off. Answer, Mr. Carver. His face reddened. We believe the land was community maintained. Belief doesn't make theft legal, the judge snapped. Did you confirm ownership with the county before authorizing the sale? Robert opened his mouth, then closed it again. Silence. The judge leaned back, unimpressed. Sitting there, watching him squirm under questioning, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just the woman they'd bullied anymore. I was the homeowner standing on the truth. Something stronger than all their lies combined. My fear began to dissolve, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Ethan continued, his voice steady as stone. Your Honor, the HOA not only defrauded my client but harassed her with false fines, vandalized her property, and attempted to intimidate her into silence. We ask that the board be held accountable and the property restored to Mrs. Reed immediately. The judge took a long pause before speaking. I've reviewed the evidence, the county records, and the testimonies. It's clear the Evergreen Hills HOA grossly overstepped its authority. She turned her sharp gaze toward Robert. Your association acted outside its charter, violated state property law, and engaged in fraudulent transfer. Therefore, I'm ordering the HOA to return all ownership rights to Mrs. Reed, remove any liens, and pay restitution for damages. The sound of the gavel cracked through the air like thunder. I exhaled, my shoulders trembling. It was over. Finally over. Ethan smiled at me, quiet and proud. You did it, he said. But as the courtroom began to empty, I caught sight of Robert at the defendant's table, jaw tight, eyes burning with silent rage. He wasn't beaten. Not yet. There was something in that look, something cold and unfinished. And I knew this fight wasn't over, not entirely. Because justice didn't stop at the courtroom door. Legal nugget. An HOA cannot sell, lease, or reassign private property, even by majority vote. Ownership isn't up for debate. It's protected by law. The courtroom verdict hit Evergreen Hills like a storm that had been waiting too long to break. Within a week, Robert Carver's resignation letter went public. Clipped, defensive, and void of apology. The HOA board voted to dissolve itself soon after, citing irreparable loss of trust within the community. The same people who once hid behind bylaws and fines were suddenly silent, their authority evaporating overnight. For months, they had ruled through fear. Letters, threats, humiliation. Now the letters stopped. The fines disappeared. The silence that once felt suffocating now felt like peace. It started small. One by one, neighbors began approaching me again. Not with suspicion, but with shame. Carol, the woman who once avoided eye contact, came by with a basket of muffins and tears in her eyes. "We should have stood up sooner," she said. "I'm sorry, Jessica. I didn't know how to respond, so I just hugged her." It wasn't about being right anymore. It was about being free. That weekend, my kids helped me reclaim the driveway. We scrubbed away the faded, sold letters still ghosting across the concrete. I watched my son kneel down with a paintbrush, his small hand steady as he traced a clean white line along the curb. "Is it really ours again, Mom?" he asked. "It always was," I said softly. "They just forgot that." The air smelled like wet paint and sunlight. For the first time in months, laughter echoed off the street again. My daughter riding her bike in circles, the sound of the tires humming across the pavement that nearly wasn't ours anymore. Neighbors joined in, some bringing over tools, others just watching quietly as I repainted the fence Daniel had built years ago. Every brushstroke felt like healing, not just for the house, but for me. I remembered the nights I'd sat awake, terrified, wondering if I'd lose everything. And now here I was, painting over fear itself. When the last coat dried, I stood at the edge of the driveway, looking at the house. It didn't look new. It looked alive again. I realized then that power, real power, isn't in titles or rules or signatures. It's in standing up when no one else will. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the neighborhood was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that comes from fear, but the kind that comes from peace finally settling where it belongs. I tucked my kids into bed and sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the night air cool against my skin. For the first time in months, I slept until I heard a car engine outside my window. The sound of that car engine outside my window faded into the night, but I didn't move. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I had faced worse, and I'd survived. The war was over, but the lessons it left behind would stay with me for the rest of my life. When you go through something like this, you start to see the world differently. You learn that standing up for yourself isn't loud or glamorous. It's quiet. It's lonely. It's 100 little decisions you make when no one's clapping for you. But it's worth it. Every sleepless night, every tear, every moment you want to quit. Because when you finally win, it doesn't just change your story. It changes who you are. Looking back, every step of this fight taught me something that I wish someone had told me before it all began. Legal nugget: never underestimate public records. They can bring down anyone. Transparency is the weapon corruption fears the most. Those weren't just lessons in law, they were lessons in life. For too long, I believed I was powerless, just one homeowner against a system built to intimidate. But I learned that power isn't given, it's claimed. And once you find your voice, you never go back to silence. Weeks after the verdict, peace settled over my home like sunlight through clean glass. My garden bloomed again. The laughter of my children filled the air. The house, Daniel's house, finally felt alive. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows reminded me, I'd fought for this. I'd earned this. If you've ever faced something like I did, a neighbor who crossed a line, a board that abused its power, a system that told you to stay quiet, don't. Stand up. Document everything. Ask questions. Fight smart. Because the truth is stronger than intimidation. What would you do if your HOA sold your driveway? Comment your story below. I want to hear it. And if you believe homeowners deserve justice, like, share, and subscribe. Because the next story, well, it's one you won't want to miss. Because next they came for my fence. I didn't just win back my driveway, I won back my life.